online and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Leidy will be absent. Mayor Pro Tem Luke Manhero-Massa.
Here.
Councilmember Burns will be absent. Councilmember Jaramillo.
Here.
Councilmember Kondo.
Here.
Councilmember Roper.
Here.
Councilmember Goff.
Here.
Councilmember Nowicki.
Here.
And Councilmember Walker will be absent.
Thank you. We have one discussion item tonight, and that is the recommended 2025 capital improvement program budget. And we have Deputy City Manager Jason Loveland, who is our captive here tonight, to introduce this item. Welcome.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. As Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, we're presenting the recommended 2025 capital improvement program budget for you this evening. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago on August 5th, we presented the general fund budget at a very high level, kind of at the first phase of development. And tonight we're going to focus on less of the operational side of things and more on just the capital, this is kind of the fun stuff, the things that make the community tick a little bit more so than just the human capital, which we kind of focused on a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to go through 5 funds: the Conservation Trust Fund, Capital Projects Fund, Water Fund, Wastewater Fund, and Stormwater Fund. In the packet, we have summaries that really show beginning fund balance, forecasted revenues coming in, and then expenditures and projects. I'm going to turn it over to really the experts in these particular project areas, the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture, Amanda Peterson, and our Director of Public Works, Sarah Borgers, to go through those projects. But we can circle back to some of the finer details on the revenues or reserve areas of those funds. But I think it's important really to get through what the projects are, what the timing is, and kind of what our plans are for the projects. And at the end, I can come back and summarize as you go through if you have any specific questions about how the 5-year forecast kind of is shaking out. So with that, does anybody have any questions before I turn it over to who you really want to hear from?
Any questions? No?
All right, I will turn it over to Ms. Peterson. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Director Peterson.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Amanda Peterson, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. So the Parks, Recreation, and Culture projects are identified in 2 of our funds, the Conservation Trust Fund and the Capital Projects Fund. Per our municipal code, just as a little bit of background, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board does review our budget, both operating and capital projects budget each year prior to presentation to you, and then they make a formal recommendation prior to budget adoption. So right now, they're in the process of that review and have had an opportunity to see each of the projects that we're bringing forward to you tonight. So as we go through the project list, you'll see that we have projects identified in 2024 through 2029. Those 2024 projects, most of those are either underway or complete or planned for work here later this year. And the 2026 through 2029 projects really are placeholders for the future. Many of those are ongoing program areas, things that we're doing year over year, and you're seeing those repeat over time. So my intent tonight is to focus on those 2025 proposed projects. Certainly if there are questions about any of the others, I'm happy to answer those as we go. So I'll start here with the Conservation Trust Fund. The annual revenue in the Conservation Trust Fund is approximately $500,000 each year, varies a little as we kind of go through the 2025 through 2029 years. And those are the city's share of lottery proceeds. So they're not grant funds, those are discretionary that come to us as a share back from those dollars. Their use is limited to parks, recreation, and culture capital improvements and the maintenance of those improvements. So with that, I will jump in to the 2025 projects. We have, first is the Greenway Trail replacement. This is an annual program. We have $75,000 identified in 2025 to continue that ongoing maintenance. So typically what we're looking at are replacement of heaving or cracked slabs, anything that might be a tripping hazard, minor rerouting, but not whole new sections or segments with that 75,000. We try to identify those in a relative, some kind of group those together throughout the city as we're looking at that program, but really prioritize based on what may be a hazard as our community is using those trails. Next project is playground equipment replacement in the amount of $300,000. That project is slated for Danahay Park in 2025. That project would include replacement of the playground as well as replacement of the pavilion and then the addition of pedestrian lighting. You'll see that as a trend really through all of our projects that came out of or is coming out of Playbook as we're looking at what are those general improvements that the community has desired, and safety really was at the top of that list, and increased lighting was one way, a strong way that people provided us with feedback saying that was a way that helped them feel safer in our parks. That project is a good candidate for an Adams County Open Space grant, and we do have that slated for submission for a grant this fall. Staff are working on it right now and getting ready for that submission. Next project on the list is J.C. Park improvements at $250,000. These improvements are currently nearing design completion. It's renovation of the restroom facility as well as the scorekeeper's booth that sits right above the restroom facility. For those of you who have been in those facilities recently, you would know it's time. They've looked like they've looked for as many years as I can remember. So really looking at improvements similar to what we also have in the works for this year at E.B. Rains, or maintaining the structure, but really replacing all of the amenities inside the restrooms. Still a very utilitarian approach, but updated. That is also a strong candidate for a grant, and so we are submitting that request this fall as well. And those are the projects within the Conservation Trust Fund. Any questions there before I move on to capital projects? Fund.
Yes, Director Peterson, it does look like we have a couple of
Okay.
questions. Councilmember Nowicki?
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Director Peterson, for being here. With regard to the Greenway Trail, is there any plan to kind of connect it? So I live in Ward 2, right on the border of Ward 1. If I wanted to walk to the park, I usually, if I wanted to walk to Stonehawker and all that stuff down to the trails to get to Margaret Carpenter, I have to walk down 112, essentially. Is there any plans to kind of connect that better? Or I have to walk along the sketchy kind of light rail dirt path to,
Please don't
which
do
makes
that.
it hard for a stroller, hard for a bike. I've heard I can kind of divert off and go down Irma and then weave through there. But I'd really like to see kind of more of a direct path. Is there any kind of?
So I'd have to look at that specific segment. You are correct in that we don't have as many east-west connections as we do, or as many north-south connections as we do east-west connections throughout the city. The best connection right now is if you go up Irma and past J.C. Park, you stay on the trail all the way through Stonehawker, or all the way through to Stonehawker. And then that connects to Grange Hall Creek going to the east or to the west as well. I can look at that segment a little closer. These specific dollars are focused on maintenance of the existing trail. The addition of new trail would be a project in and of itself. So we do have the Connect Northglenn plan. That is referenced through Playbook as well. So that plan was adopted several years, 2017, 2018. And then we've recommitted through Playbook, or in the process of doing that with those trail connections as well. We know that was a strong desire of many community members, just improved trail connections throughout the city. So I anticipate that to be a priority over the next 10 years. I do not have a segment, though, identified as new trail for 2025.
And last question, when you say kind of eligible for a grant or most likely, kind of, can you give me a brief overview of that process and what confidence you have that you would be able to get something like that?
Sure. So we are fairly careful about the projects we bring forward for each grant source, trying to identify which ones best fit the project we have. So we're not trying to ask for dollars in a way that don't make sense to the granting agency. With Adams County Open Space, those are dollars we've asked that are limited to being requested by entities within Adams County, so that improves our chances very significantly. However, will say over the last couple of years, they've had a significant fund balance. This past cycle, most of that fund balance was dispersed. So that means we go back to kind of a more what I'll call a normal grant cycle for the fall of 2025, which is a little different than what we've dealt with over the last few years. Because of that, in the last cycle, I did ask for some more maintenance type projects. So we actually asked for Greenway Trail dollars this last spring cycle, and we received them. We asked for a significant number of trail dollars and received them. That's not a project I would bring forward when I know the budget is tighter on the grant side. Playground replacements, those new amenities for our community are much better asks when we know dollars are potentially tighter.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Kondo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and Director Peterson. I want to commend you for really aggressively going after these Adams County grants. I think I remember receiving a check for over $500,000 at one point or another. So that's wonderful. I'm not sure, I'm not trying to stump you or anything like that. Maybe this might be a question for our assistant or deputy city manager. But when I look at the Conservation Trust Fund and I look at the 2024 budget column, I see a lot of numbers that aren't necessarily round numbers. For example, the Greenway Trail replacement, 138,729. So I'm just trying to, in my head, whereas in the future estimates, they're round numbers, they all end in zero. So I'm just trying to figure out what exactly are the 2024 numbers? Are those the actual numbers that were spent, and that's why it's not a rounded number?
So there's a combination there. There are some carryover dollars in that column from '23. They're now in the 2024 budget. So some of those projects are partially complete, which is why you see a
Okay,
kind of
gotcha.
odd number in that column.
And I see a thumbs up
They're-
behind you.
They're in progress.
Okay, cool. Because that was the one thing that stuck out to me as I'm looking at all this stuff. It's like, yeah, future projections all are rounded very nicely, and then everything else in the 2024, you have these weird sort of, $227. So I appreciate that explanation.
Yes.
Great question. I had the same question on the Greenway Trail replacement, so thank you for that. Councilmember Goff?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. I have a couple of questions, I guess. One is, and I know you said what the Conservation Trust Fund is limited to, but is it like building a new park, would that fall under that heading?
It would, yes.
Okay, so, and then I know we're got grants out for the Odell Berry Park, so are these all like on the same timeline, or from
They're
the
all-
same source, or?
All different sources, and I had listed it for the end, but I can jump ahead because I didn't have it on the slide, so I will jump ahead. I know there had been a question about the Odell Berry Park funding plan. So we have received so far $1.5 million from Adams County Open Space for the construction of Odell Berry Park. We knew that grant source was a good place to start because of our ability to carry those dollars over until we were able to secure remaining funds. Also gives us some dollars to be able to show other granting agencies that we have a commitment, we have match dollars in place, which gives us a building block to start from. We had applied for a Colorado Health Foundation construction grant 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. We did not receive that construction grant. Instead, we received a technical assistance grant. So that grant was much, much smaller and provided us with some funding to update our design, ensure we were reaching our underserved populations, ensure those individuals were compensated for their time and that they spent with us because it was a series of meetings, and then the updated plans. And they provided the landscape architect to do those updates for us. So that process is now complete. We had originally been holding on submission of other applications because we were told once we went through that process with the Colorado Health Foundation, we would then resubmit for the construction grant. their priorities have changed in that time, and they have since said that this likely is not a great project for that funding source. So we do not intend to go after any additional Colorado Health Foundation grant dollars. However, we did still receive their support, their assistance in gathering additional community input, updating the documents to reflect that input, and then that project really is shovel-ready. It's ready to go out to bid. So we've identified 3 grant sources as being strong, this being a strong candidate for. Staff have already initiated conversations with each of these entities. You'll actually see coming forward here in the next month or so a request for a resolution supporting applications to 2 of the 3 entities. So the first is GOCO, which is Great Outdoors Colorado. That's the other side of the lottery proceeds. So just like those Adams County open space dollars, there's discretionary dollars plus grant dollars that are competitive. So we intend to ask for about $1 million from GOCO. Those are due in October. Well, letter of intent is due at the end of October with the full grant application if we're invited to submit in December of this year. We have the land water conservation dollars. Those we intend to request about $1.2 million. That letter of intent is due on September 3rd with a deadline for the full grant, again, assuming that we are invited to apply on October 1st. And both of those have a 1 to 3 year time frame to expend the dollars. So it does still give us a little bit of time to continue to amass the dollars required to complete the project. And then the third one is DOLA, which is the Energy and Mineral Impact Funds, and that one is a little later. So that one's due in March of 2025. Gives us an opportunity to start to hear back from some of the others as we're submitting that application and make adjustments as we go. Some of these don't have any match requirements, which is somewhat helpful as we're not necessarily matching grant dollars to grant dollars. None of these, at this point, we're not submitting any where we need to say, hey, we need this one we've applied for but haven't heard back from to match a grant we're still asking for. We're trying to keep those separate at this point.
Okay, now are you still needing letters?
Yes, please.
And so do you have some or any or?
I know that Jesse has reached out and received some. I don't believe I've received any from the Dice Board, and we chatted with them a
Yeah.
couple of months ago about that.
I'm checking.
So if we could get a letter from the Dice Board, that would be greatly appreciated, and we would submit that with all of these applications that are intended to go forward here over the next few months.
And what's the earliest deadline? for
The
that?
earliest deadline I have is end of August.
Okay. Okay.
The next one isn't until October.
All right. And these letters could be used for more than one?
Yes, they can.
Okay, great.
None of
Thank-
them need to be addressed to a specific granting entity.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
As a follow-up to that, how much was the DOLA grant? I got 1 million, 1.2
We
million.
have $1 million identified in that one right now as our potential ask.
Thank you. Councilmember Kondo, do you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. And just to refresh my memory, the Odell Berry Park is about a $5 million price tag.
Correct. So if we were to receive all of the dollars that we are asking for, plus those that we have a shortfall of approximately $115,000. I feel like we could make that happen. We also, as we get to the point of, depending on how successful we are with those grant tasks, we may get to a point where we look at the scope and identify if we can scale some things back and phase some things over time. It's a tough one to phase because there's no development so far, and a big chunk of those costs is related to the kind of underground infrastructure, getting it ready. That's not the super exciting part of the park project that people want to see come out of the ground. They want to see things come out of the ground. And so I want to be careful in phasing that we don't do the things people don't get to see and use and wait on the things that they get to. So
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you. I have a question, or maybe more of a clarification. So under the playground equipment replacement, there's Danahay Park or playground and shelter in 2025.
Yes.
And then in 2024, we did have funds budgeted also for Danahay Park playground. So how does that divvy up? Is part of it the shelter part and part of it the playground part?
I am looking at 2024 2024, and refreshing my own memory.
Yeah, it says pavilion shelter replacement funds budgeted in 2024, and it does list Alvin Thomas in 2024 and Danahay Park in 2024, the pavilions and shelters at each park.
Can you tell me which page you're on, just so that I can?
44.
Oh,
Of the book.
of the book. I will have to take a
It's
look
in
back at that. They may be split out, yes.
Okay. All right. I just wasn't sure, because I don't remember what portion in 2024 was just for the shelter part, but I guess we
And
can find that out. Does that make sense? Do you want a copy of the page, maybe?
I just don't have a copy of that page in front of me.
Sorry.
I have tonight's and I didn't have last month's,
Amanda,
or last week's. Thank you.
can snag this copy and take a, it's actually highlighted.
So Danahay Playground and Shelter is scheduled for 2025 per those notes.
Yes, and then just right below bocce ball court, in the pavilion shelter replacement, it also says there were funds budgeted in 2024 for maybe a portion of that. It also says Danahay Park, so it's listed twice, so that's where my confusion is. Does that make sense?
Probably referencing.
Oh,
the-
under
the
bocce
next-
ball?
Yeah.
So I will look at a little more detail. There were improvements made at Danahay in 2024. So bocce ball, tennis were both at Danahay. But we have not replaced that pavilion yet, so that is
Okay,
still scheduled out.
so it looks like there might be some funding for that portion at least for Danahay Park, separate from the playground, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Oh, I see where you're looking right now.
Yes.
Under pavilion replacement, where funds are budgeted in 2024.
For
Al
Danahay
Thomas
Park.
Playground is scheduled to be replaced in 2024, which is moving forward. And Danahay Playground should say in 2025.
Okay,
So I apologize.
okay, that's great. They're just separate portions. Again,
Yes.
that was my question. Okay, that's perfect. I don't see any other questions, so I think we're probably ready to move on.
All right.
Thank you.
We will forward that. So as we look at the Capital Projects Fund, as I mentioned earlier, we have two primary funding sources that Parks, Recreation, and Culture projects are taken out of for the Capital Projects Fund. One is our Adams County Open Space Discretionary funds, which are, again, approximately $500,000 each year. And then the other is general fund projects. Typically, our general fund projects are kind of the citywide, are citywide. They are not as likely to be good grant asks, just as some kind of background as we go through. So I will jump into that project list. The first is the citywide fence maintenance. We have $320,000 identified out of general fund for that fence replacement. Segments of our fence are nearing 25 years old at this point. And as we have done, staining and sealing, cleaning, repair, many of those are just reaching the end of their useful life. So we did the first section last year, and that was a segment along Washington Street closer to 104th. As we work our way through the city, staff has done an assessment of all of those city-owned fences and identified those that are in kind of the worst condition and the most contiguous, so that we're not just hopping around doing pieces here and there. So they have identified the next section to the south on Washington as being or to the north, sorry, as being the next priority. The next on the list is emergency park repairs. This is $25,000 from Adams County Open Space. Unlike most of our other projects, these dollars are only spent if we need them. They're there so that we can stay on top of things that we couldn't otherwise plan for. We don't carry those dollars over year to year. If we don't spend them, they go back into that ADCO fund balance for redistribution to other projects in future years. We started this because what we were finding is things like an individual slide can be upwards of $5,000. That's not something we just have in our operating budget to replace if it's vandalized, if it fails on us. And they have a fairly significant lead time. and those products tend to change year over year. So if we wait and put them in a budget that's 2 or 3 or 4 years out, then we're leaving our community without an amenity for that time. So this gives us a way to be much more responsive when we have things that fail or break in our park system, and that ability to replace that single slide or that single swing or park bench or whatever it may be that has been damaged or is otherwise unusable. The next item on the list is community garden. This has kind of been floating around for the last few years on this list. It was identified in prior strategic plan as a sustainability measure. We had asked to hold on that until the sustainability coordinator was on board and really looking at that kind of holistically. These are just the capital dollars for construction of a community garden. They don't really identify how we would operate that space over time. We're looking at this really as a fall 2025 project with further discussion as we move through the next year about how we would staff that. We also believe this is a good candidate for grant dollars and have it slated in the spring, in the fall 2025 slot. One of the things I haven't shared is we are limited in the number of asks, not necessarily the dollars we can ask for, but the number of asks for Adams County Open Space. So we can ask for 2 large projects and 1 mini grant with a maximum, that mini grant has a maximum of $25,000 each of the 2 cycles a year. So we're really trying to be careful about how we plan that year or 2 years ahead so that we can use those grant slots in an appropriate manner. So we've identified that as a mini grant, not as a full grant. So one of those mini grant slots for the fall of 2025. By that point, we should have had the opportunity to have more conversation about what that staffing looks like and how we would activate that for our community.
Director Peterson, it looks like we have a question if you are ready
Yes.
to take one. Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. 2 questions, just to clarify my understanding, because maybe I might have misperceived this. So the fences there along Washington, that is a Parks and Rec responsibility, not an operations maintenance?
Those are mine right now, yes.
Okay,
We kind of draw straws, but I won them.
gotcha. And then follow on the community garden. Is this the garden that we're planning on putting over at Stonehawker, or where are we?
So there's already one at Stonehawker.
Okay.
That community garden exists and is fully operational
Okay.
with volunteers through the Historic Commission and
Gotcha.
Foundation.
So this would be
This
a
would be a city, really a city-run volunteer base for people to have additional opportunity to grow food, particularly those individuals or if those households are living in multifamily housing that don't have that plot in their own space. We've looked at several different spaces that could be good, looking at proximity to multifamily housing, parking, access to irrigation, all of those things that would make this kind of make sense for our community. We've looked at JC Park, so near the ball field, but there's some space there that looks like it would make sense to us, as well as Northwest Open Space outside of the athletic field area.
Gotcha, thank you.
You're welcome. Firm space has not been, there's still open to other suggestions at this point.
Great, thank you. Director Peterson, I actually do have a question.
Okay.
Or a curiosity, because I was walking along the trail in Northwest Open Space by the View Apartments, and it looked like they were setting up some kind of community garden, and I'm not sure, is that like an apartment thing, or?
Yes, I believe it is. I think I'd heard that they were doing some community gardening there near the tennis courts.
Not near the tennis
Or
courts,
the-
no.
I shouldn't say the
View
tennis court.
Apartments by the soccer field.
Sorry, there's a former tennis court that they then used for a dog park area for a while. That's on the apartment side.
Okay, yes, that is the area.
Okay, it hasn't been a tennis court in many, many, many
No,
years,
no.
so I apologize
I
for
had to
saying
think about
that in my
for a
head.
second. I'm
It's,
like, oh, yes.
I know where that is,
yes.
but
It still
yes.
kind of looks like something was there. Okay. That was really wonderful to see, and I wasn't sure if the city had anything to do with that. That's just a private thing then.
Yes.
Well, good for them. That's really great. And then I had another question, and actually this was Councilmember Burns' question, but I do think she did get an answer, but I think it's worth bringing forward. She had asked about the materials on the citywide fence replacement because of the amount of damage along Washington and 104th. And, I've heard that cars seem to be attracted to those fences. So there's a lot of damage. but at this time, it's not a feasible option, right, to replace the material,
Yeah, we've
to
looked
change the
at,
material?
we have looked at options for other materials, primarily because there are some materials that may have a lower ongoing maintenance. They still need to be replaced eventually, but don't need to be stained and sealed on a regular basis, may have more longevity as it relates to the elements. Most of those materials wouldn't necessarily hold up differently to vehicle accidents. I would say, and I'd have to pull numbers, I don't have them off the top of my head. To me, it feels like you're right, we have a lot of fences that get damaged or hit. It doesn't feel like it's changed drastically over the years. It's been a somewhat regular occurrence. Most of those replacements, it feels like we're doing them regularly. Most of those are limited to 1 or 2 panels, so it's small sections. But yes, it is an ongoing challenge for sure. Changing those materials out, one, I think pushes the replacement schedule to have matching materials. But it just very significantly changes the cost, both for that initial replacement as well as for replacement if they're damaged in an accident.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
So we had thrown out some possibilities, I think, last year or the year before, about using composite material or using a block wall. They're just much more expensive options.
Looks like we have a couple more questions
Okay.
now. Councilmember Nowicki.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Director Peterson, so I assume with the different years and the cost going up, that's just the cost of materials and.
It's the different
requests.
segments that staff have identified and the length of those segments.
Okay.
And so there is an inflation factor in there as well, but the primary reason for a change in cost kind of year over year is which segment of funds has been identified for replacement in that year.
Okay, and that's all existing fence?
Correct.
Does the city have any plans to build new fencing?
We do not currently have any plans for new fencing as arterial fencing in the CIP.
'Cause I think, I seem to recall one of the things I talked about in the strategic plan was fencing, proposing new fencing along 112th, especially as 112th becomes a little more arterial, I think.
I think it's something, certainly you can have that conversation through strategic planning and long-range planning. My kind of just initial feedback is looking at all of the fencing we currently have, and it's the fact that it's aging and that need to replace it. So it's really a matter of, can we identify dollars to replace and repair what we have, as well as add to it and replace and repair that over time.
So if we did decide, because this is obviously projected out 5 years, our strategic plan is the same length. If we did decide, would that just have to redo the numbers and that?
We would have to identify new funding to provide new fencing, or make a decision not to do replacement and maintenance of existing fencing in order to put in new fencing, which kind of can put us behind over time.
If I could just add to help clarify with the strategic plan. So we had brought back the strategic plan and what we can include in the 2025 budget several weeks ago. So when I bring back the strategic plan and more of its full document in, I believe, they're late September, October, I think it's early October, you will see underneath that particular idea, I think I have it in infrastructure, that there's a notation that funding needs to be identified. So anywhere there's an idea in 2026 and beyond, within that 5-year period, and we don't currently have a funding source for it, we are noting through funding needs to be identified. So, I mean, that really to staff means there's potential for funding, and certainly there's a prioritization, that discussion that council can have in each budget cycle. But addition of new fencing, like Director Peterson mentioned, would require funding beyond what she's able to do in terms of maintenance, just keeping up with maintenance.
Okay, great, thank you,
Yeah.
both of you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for bringing that up, because that, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, that was something that we heard a lot at our Ward 4 meeting from the Park Vistas residents, is when is that fencing going to be replaced? And my response luckily aligns with what City Manager Guyer just said, that it's something that we're considering in our 5-year strategic plan at some point down the road. Councilmember Roper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. My question, I guess, is back to the fences that are sustaining damage from drivers. Have we ever, instead of replacing it with a different composite product, have we ever looked at, I'm sure you guys have, I'm just putting this out here, reflective material that would alert people that
We have not directly, but we could certainly explore possibilities. I think much of that would need to be closer to the street. There's pretty significant, kind of amazes me every time, because there's pretty significant space between roadway, trail, landscaping, fence. So you're a distance off, so I'm not sure that we would want to do that on the fence itself, but potentially between the roadway and the fence.
often I see the fence on 104th Grant is ahead, and yes, I'm often wondering how that happens.
Speed and alcohol are a bad
So
combination.
then probably reflective things would not
Wouldn't,
help.
yeah.
But-
Thank you.
How
Just
about
trying to be a
spikes?
problem solver.
I like that idea, though. It's creative thinking.
Yes.
Any more questions for Director Peterson?
Would you like me to finish the list?
Yes.
Okay. Because there may be more
Until this
questions.
point.
Okay.
There will be.
So the next item on the list is bleachers and dugout covers at both Northwest Open Space and Rotary. We have ball fields at both of those parks. We have a couple of covered dugouts at Northwest Open Space, but many of them are open to the elements. And that's a request we get very regularly from the thousands of kiddos and adults that are playing on those ball fields to have dugout covers. That also is a good grant request project, so we do have that one slated for the fall of 2025. Next up is park amenity replacement. We've had conversation about this through the long-range planning process, through strategic planning process, and replacement of our kind of older style park amenities that are the kind of plastic-coated expanded metal that we just haven't seen longevity out of. They're a less expensive model, but we tend to replace them much more often and upgrading those to a powder-coated steel. And so you've seen some of those replacements start to come through on individual projects, but we haven't tackled the city-wide replacement. So this would be about a 5-year program to replace all of those. Once those are replaced, then that would taper off very significantly for a more kind of regular renovation schedule. But we have some pieces at Croak Reservoir that are that powder-coated steel that went in 2006 and still look great today. Whereas we have some of the expanded metal plastic-coated pieces that really can get pretty damaged almost as soon as they're out in our parks. So really think the longevity is worth that investment and that ability just to have a much improved look in our park spaces. That is identified as a general fund project. Huron Crossing fence, trail, and pedestrian lighting. This is another project that has come out of playbook recommendations. We have a short segment of trail that's kind of missing along that section, where there's a sidewalk along 117th on the north side of the park, and then it picks up again kind of on the east and on the west, but right during where the park is doesn't have that connection. So this would add that connection, would add a short segment of fence similar to the steel fencing that we put up at between Village Greens and the skate park to help prevent basketballs and kiddos from kind of running into the street there. And then again, you'll see that pedestrian lighting trend through projects here as we move forward. So when we're doing a project identifying where we can add pedestrian lighting to increase safety. That one is identified for spring 2025 grant request as well. Larson Glen and Fitness and Futsal, we have identified for 2025. These are also recommended in Playbook. Larson Glen doesn't have a lot of play amenities, so really a good opportunity to take and expand on what we have there while still maintaining grassy area, still maintaining parking and the basketball courts, but providing some additional fun for that space. We potentially have opportunity for some equipment donation, which would really decrease our costs there. Also a grant opportunity in fall 2025. And then the last project I have for you is a festival lawn shade structure. So we have been doing more and more activities out on festival lawn, but we do get very regular feedback about the lack of shade. Those trees are growing, but they're doing it very slowly. And there's really a large expanse in between that just won't get covered by trees. There'll be shade out in the space, but not necessarily out in the center. We have been having conversations we got our art staff really excited. We originally were looking at just kind of some more utilitarian shade structures, but there's some really great opportunities for textile artists out there. So we are looking at that as a grant request through SCFD and the Arts and Humanities Foundation. So Michael will be working with that team, as well as Adams County Open Space dollars, so that we can not just do a utilitarian shade that we order off the shelf, but something that really makes a statement out on festival lawn. Because we're looking at a textile, it still will be seasonal, so it wouldn't stay up year-round. We would do that kind of last snowfall to first snowfall, but really kind of an exciting way to go about adding shade to part of that space. And with that, I'm happy to take any additional questions you may have.
Thank you. Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Just going back to that line item for Huron Crossing fence. For clarity, I just want to make sure I understand this. Is this a fence to keep basketballs from going into West 117th Avenue?
Yes.
Thank you.
Questions? I do have a question, actually. On the park amenity replacement, those coated benches, is that similar or the same as the ones that were just installed at Rotary Park?
Yes.
The one that was dedicated? Okay, because that is really nice.
It is.
I was hoping that's what it was. And then my other question is, I can't find it, but I know I saw it somewhere in here, shades for playgrounds? Playgrounds that don't have shades?
So that came up through Playbook as one of those priority areas. And so as we look at each of the playgrounds that we're replacing, we don't necessarily have any scheduled as an individual project. But as we're looking at like the replacement at Danahay, how are we providing shade as part of that project?
Okay, great. Do you know if the playground in Northwest Open Space is on the radar at all? Because I know families often tell me, like, there's nobody there during the summer because it just burns their little legs.
Yes. So not yet. Again,
Okay.
looking at it as we're doing a replacement, building that into those projects. So with Danahay being scheduled for next year, that's a good one to, as we're doing the design, incorporating additional shade into the design, knowing that that's a priority for community members. We wish we could do it all at once, but I don't think you'd like the budget I brought forward, and I don't know that I could get it past finance.
In the future, retroactively, or is it just something, like you said, just as we are replacing playgrounds? That's the only time we're going to look at that?
We may be able to look at some of them as a one-off. I would say as we're doing a playground replacement, the intent is that we do at least one playground replacement each year. And so theoretically, we get to those within about a 10 to 15 year period, which is still a long time.
Right.
So if opportunity arises, we certainly will look at that.
And you are excellent at getting grants, so thank you for that, as was mentioned before. But is there any possibility, because I think that playground's in pretty good shape, so I don't see that as, like, the playground structure itself is pretty good. It's just the shade part. Is there opportunities for grants for that, or is that not a good thing? As you mentioned, there's good things for grants.
Yes.
You have to pick and choose priorities, of course, too.
It potentially could be. Having matching dollars would be important. So most of those grants that we're seeking, we're identifying at least 30 to 40% of the project cost, and then seeking those remaining dollars in grants. We would still need some dollars out of the city budget to match to.
Oh, you're doing an excellent job. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Looks like we don't have any other questions. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
thank you. I will pass it on to Sarah.
Thank you. Welcome, our brand-new Director of Public Works.
Oh, yes, I'm so excited to
Gorgeous.
be here. Not terrifying at all to present a new CIP on your second week on the job. But I have to say the timing is really, really good. So Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council, I am Sarah Borgers, Public Works and Utilities Director, and it's exciting to meet all of you. Amanda did a great job, I think, setting up a lot of it. I'll touch base on the 2025 items. If you have questions on anything else, please let me know. So starting off here with residential street overlay, I think that this is one that you're probably fairly familiar with. I know that City Council has set a goal for a PCI of 70. We are currently sitting at a 68. To maintain us there at 68, we need about $1.5 million a year in order to continue to stay at that 68 PCI. And that's a really fantastic number and a fantastic goal. It's higher than many communities that I am aware of, and so that's just a really great place to be. You'll see we have $950,000 for 2025 and $1.5 million moving forward after that, and that's when some additional funding will become available from the general fund. All right. Let's see. So next item on the list is traffic signal replacement. With that project, we put $400,000 into that budget every year. Sometimes that's enough to do a project, sometimes the projects are bigger, and so we'll let it accumulate over a year or two. So you'll see this year in 2024, we've got about $800,000 in there, and that's to do the work at 104th and Washington. There are temp span wires there, and so we're getting up those permanent poles so that that's nice and aesthetically pleasing, but also nice and safe as well. Those are very long lead time items, so we're hoping to get those in by the end of the year. And then moving forward, we're going to continue to look at that. Our next thing on the list is we have span wires at Huron and 100th or so. So we're going to be evaluating that to be our next project moving forward. Then we have our concrete program. That's $100,000 every year that we put towards things like sidewalks, curb and gutter, that kind of thing. We do an evaluation, I believe, every 3 years. And so this is a continuation of the same thing there. And then skipping down to school zone safety. That is a project to improve safety around our 14 schools. Up to now, we have completed 9. There were 2 schools slated this year. We got all the concrete work done and all of the stuff that we had within our power to get done. There's some flashing lights that we still plan on installing, but unfortunately, the long lead time, those are about 3 months out. And so we're hoping to get those up as soon as we get them in. Probably also important to note on that one is that Adams 12 does help with the cost of some of that. And it ends up being between 30% and 40% of the project cost that Adams 12 is helping us with. So that's a great partnership. $200,000 in parking lot repairs annually. This is a newer line item, I believe, and it's helping us pave some of our facilities' parking lots. I think this one went to help with the Northwest Open Space parking lot, and then there's some hope to have it help with M&O facility and some of the other facility parking lots around the city. So we'll be continuing to do work throughout the years on that project. Temporary traffic calming. You'll see $500,000 recommended for next year. I think we're all pretty familiar with that conversation now. I'm still learning the details of all the roads and where we have traffic humps versus where we have striping and flashing lights and the like. And so I'm getting up to speed on that, but that's something that staff is spending a good amount of time on evaluating and making sure that we're spending those dollars as appropriately as we can. All right, so then there's a few things I might just mention that's left over from 2024. just in case there's questions on those. Community Center Drive Bridge Repair, that's a collaborative effort with CDOT. That did not happen this summer. There was some budget questions and things that we were working on with CDOT. Since traffic increases across the bridge during the school year, there's some discussions about pushing that off till next summer. So if you're expecting things to happen on Community Center Drive over the highway, it may be a little while until we can get to that project. Let's see here. And I think that might be it for that. Are there any more questions on this?
Yes, Director Borders, we actually have a few questions.
Awesome.
Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. So, very first line item, when you talk about the PCI index 68, I don't know if it's 68% or 68 points. But if you're saying 1.5 will hold us steady at 6.8, but yet we're only funding 950K, what will that do to our PCI index? How many points will we drop in a year?
Can you repeat the end of your question? I
So in other
apologize.
words, if we don't maintain the 1.5 million, obviously, you're gonna start to see a glide slope. And I wonder if you can characterize that on an annual basis or maybe 2 or 3 year time horizon? What
Yeah.
does that look like?
That is a fantastic question. I have a guess in my head, but I'd much rather make sure that I give you an accurate answer. Is that something that council would be okay if I followed up with in an email so that we can get a
Yeah.
good thorough review of that?
My concern is we spent a lot of money to get to 68. And some of you may not have been here when you heard the wonderful presentation on pavement condition index. But it's like, once you start spiraling down, you end up having to pay more just to get back to where you were at. So my chief concern here is, are we underclubbing this? And I realize that, if we're gonna put money somewhere, it has to come out of something else. But that's kind of where I'm sitting mentally, and I thought I'd share that with the days.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
So one thing to also keep in mind that supports a future discussion by council on maintaining PCI rating is that it was a suggestion, idea in the strategic planning process. I think it was yours, Councilmember Kondo, maintain PCI at that 70 threshold. So we have that included in the infrastructure section. The activity that needs to happen is council needs to have a future discussion, whether tied to 2026 budget, 2027, figure out how do you prioritize funding the different needs to maintain that PCI rating? Because I think the simple approach is the longer we go without investing that targeted amount of funding that's recommended by the PCI study, then we open ourselves up to sliding backwards. I think it would take quite a few years to slide all the way backwards to where we started, so I'm confident in saying that. But if you don't want to reduce the budget from what it is now, it's about how do we figure out how to add that differential.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. We have lots more questions for you.
Awesome.
Councilmember Roper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Hi and welcome. My question is around the traffic calming. My question was around 2026 where we have an estimated 250, but then every other year is 500,000. Is there a reason why that figure is estimated to be so different?
Yes, so I believe that that's due to specific projects that they have planned. I can't speak to those projects, but I know that there were some specific projects in most of the out years that they were looking at, and that one was just smaller for whatever reason. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Thank you. Councilmember Goff.
So my question was just about the Community Center Drive Bridge, because when we were first alerted of this, I don't know, a year and a half or something ago, it was like a maintenance issue. So, I mean, what are the downsides of delaying this?
I believe at this point, it's primarily a budgetary question with CDOT and any cost sharing that we're doing with them. I don't believe that there's any imminent safety concerns, if that's what your question
Yes,
is.
I just
Yeah.
wanna make sure.
That is not my understanding that there are substantial safety concerns with the bridge.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Jaramillo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, and welcome. And the question that I have is for citywide street lighting. I noticed that it's only for this year for $58,860. And so in the past, I've met with Excel at CML, and I've made it a priority with your predecessor to increase lighting, especially in a lot of areas that are experiencing crime. I could see the correlation with, breaking in and entering and just, in vehicles, homes, things like that. That stuff just, it deals a lot with the lack of lighting. And the lighting that's there, I feel like has probably been there since they built the neighborhood. So that's just something that I really think we should make more of a priority because it's not listed on here for the projected next 5 years. But it's a citywide issue, but I can tell you by the Vega Apartments, Webster Lake Apartments, that neighborhood, specifically, I've had friends that have lived there and now they've moved because they've said that it's been bad in that area. And a lot of it's, they feel is due to the lack of lighting. Wanted to make that more of a priority.
Absolutely. And if I may, so that 58,000 was to complete a citywide assessment for lighting across the city. And so we're going to be taking that assessment. I believe we've just received it. So we're going to be taking a look at it and looking at those high priority areas and then developing a plan based on that assessment. So it's not listed here, but there will be next steps with staff taking a very close look at that assessment at the results of it.
Great, thank you.
And an additional next step beyond what Director Borgers just shared with you is we are tying that, we're calling it implementation of the citywide street lighting program to the strategic plan. So a big piece of what staff has been doing to complement the new ideas that council has advanced is tying in what's in the works and what's in the future that didn't come up on June 17th. But this is a great example of that type of project where we've got a plan, now we need to implement the plan. And so that needs to come forward through future budget years.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, and that's okay if the answer is not available right now, but in terms of, I'll give an example of fighting with, not with Excel, but to get Excel to install lighting in an area, and took about 3 years, and then it was good to go, and then the residents didn't want the poles in their yards, and so it never happened. I'm just curious, now, apartments, sure, maybe that's a little bit easier, right, if it's on city property, but is there any recourse, like if the study shows that this area needs lighting, but it happens to be in a residential area, and the residents are like, not in my yard, I don't want a pole in my yard, even though crime has happened in that area? Is there an answer to that? I mean, I don't like to use the word to try to force somebody to have it there, but if we're doing this study and it shows these areas, what is the process for that? Maybe that's not a now question, and that's okay if we push it out for another day or an email.
Let's take this feedback and work with it. I think we need to, I wouldn't say we have a process beyond the process has been to get the approval, support of the residents.
yeah.
And that's with a lot of things, that Public Works moves forward. So we'll take that feedback and tie it into the plan and the operational aspect of the plan, so to speak.
I mean, as a homeowner, I appreciate that, of course, right? Having the say, like, well, I don't want this giant pole in my yard. But it's just a curiosity. So as a follow-up question, maybe that's an educational piece of how important it would be to please buy in. Okay.
Yeah, the example you're referring to is a great example where there are multiple complaints that the city received about that location and efforts made by staff in coordination with Excel, and then, yeah, the
It was a-
response was no, so.
I appreciate
That's
the work that staff put into that and made it happen. There was a shooting in that area, and then it just so happened that where it should go was where the resident said no. So, but thank you, staff, for working so hard to make that happen. But it happens. I don't see any other questions on this area.
Awesome. All right. So if we want to move to the water fund, if you're following along in your August 5th packet, that's page 53. So we have a few items here. One of them is a water rights category that's been kind of a long-lasting thing has supported Northglenn in their purchase of water rights. This project is also helping us with our aquifer storage reservoir, which I know you're familiar with. Having an actual bucket to put water in is a water resource in and of itself, and is often have their own water rights associated with them. So I think that's a really great project that staff has been working on. So then moving forward to the water line rehab, there is $100,000 that's put into this account to help with the water distribution system. So this is the water lines that are in the ground all throughout our community. There is a fairly high balance right now, and I'm going to be working with staff to make sure we're utilizing those dollars as best as we can. We do have aging infrastructure, and so I want to make sure that we're investing those dollars for their maximum benefit. The next line down is $200,000 that we put into an escrow account with the city of Thornton every year. This is associated with the water line that Northglenn and Thornton share from Stanley Lake to our water treatment plant, and then Thornton takes it to their water treatment plants. So we have a shared agreement with them to put money into an account, so when things come up for maintenance of that water line, we're able to address it. I know right now they're evaluating a large diameter valve that's in a large vault, fascinatingly, in Westminster, that needs to get repaired and replaced, and it's a pretty major project, so these funds will be used to help fix that water line valve. And then going down the list a little bit, we have the water treatment facility rehab. This is $250,000 that's put into this account annually. This goes into general maintenance of the facility. This might be something like a roof, new curb and gutter, asphalt pavement. If the actual structures need anything, need new paint, that kind of thing, that's what this line item is used for. Just general maintenance. It may also be used for some of the smaller components of the facility, so smaller pumps, that sort of thing, that may come out of this account as well. Then you'll also see a water line in section 36. So this is up in the area of our wastewater plant. There is currently a very small and somewhat inadequate well. I understand many in council have toured that facility, which is fantastic. Wastewater plants get a bad rap, but they're super cool. Technical terms. But so they needed a water supply, so we have got agreement with Todd Creek and are pulling a water line from Todd Creek up into the wastewater plant. So you'll see engineering budget in '24 and then construction budget shown in 2025. Generally, a good rule of thumb for many of these projects is that 10% of the project cost will go to engineering. So seeing $200,000 for engineering and $2 million for construction feels about right. The next line item down is power analysis for the water treatment plant. So you may be aware that there's been some pretty major work completed out there. The solids handling project was a fantastic project that allowed us to save 60 to 80 million gallons of water every year by just handling what we have more efficiently. We're still working through there's a component in that that's not working well at this point, and so but we're working through that. But it's a really great project, but it does take power and energy to make those kind of new projects work. We also are talking about potential for EV stations. If we need any new outbuildings, those all require power, and we're pretty tapped out. So we want to make sure we really understand the electrical needs of the water treatment facility before we move forward. So that's what that line item is for. Then the next line item is the high and low zone fencing project. So this is around the tank site down the street from the Justice Center. So we have $125,000 in the budget to replace that fencing. I know that that's an aesthetic concern, also a safety concern, as it's frequently vandalized and people cut the fence and try and get through the fence. All right. So at this juncture, are there any other questions for the Water Fund?
Yes, we have lots of questions for you
Yay.
as well. Councilmember Nowicki.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Welcome,
Thank
Director
you.
Borders. Thank you for being here. So going back to the water rights, so I'm looking at it, 11 million down to 5, then to 3, then to 970. Did I correctly hear you that you said part of that is kind of water rights, and then part of that is the storage piece, kind of the aquifer?
Yes, as a function of that water, that storage being its own water, right? Yeah, so it's
Okay.
helping.
Okay, and just a little caveat, later this week, I do get Water 101, so I'll have a better understanding. I guess why isn't it kind of parsed out, though? Like, if you said one's a bucket and one is kind of, I assume water rights are kind of a piece of paper. One's a piece of paper and one's a bucket.
You know, that's a fascinating question, way to ask that. Yes, and so there are all different kinds of water rights, and we'll certainly get into this in the Water 101 later this
Are
week.
you gonna be there?
I'll be there. Parts of it I'm gonna be learning with you, and some of it I'll be able to share with you a ton. But just for this specific question, water rights are a piece of paper that allow you to have a physical thing. So,
And I see Director Loveland standing up too,
did you want to jump in?
to tag team.
Yes.
I will just on that. So great question. So just on that specifically, I'm not going to pretend to know about the water rights, but that specific line item that you're referring to, the 0.5% sales tax right now is dedicated to enhance the city's water supply. So it kind of comes in twofold: water rights to that enhancement, and then also this ASR project to provide more storage and capacity for the water. So we're seeing both things happen, you know, along the way in that line item. So,
Okay.
and the other reason why you see it going downwards towards zero is to support potential future water right purchases, if there are any out there to be purchased, and the pilot program of the ASR project, and then expanding that if it's successful. Will spend down, you know, that, I'll use the word bucket of money, which is the 0.5% sales tax that's dedicated to that purpose. So that's why you kind of see it eventually go down to zero in a hypothetical world of forecasting.
Gotcha. Thank you. And the more you can explain things like I'm 15, the better. So using buckets, that's perfect.
Water resources is a strange beast in Colorado, where water engineers and water attorneys got together and created something really special and really crazy. I can say that because I grew up in the water resources side of the world.
Complicated.
Well, coming from Arizona, I know it's important.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, and I also failed to welcome you to the city. Welcome.
Thank you.
Two questions, and obviously maybe this is, you may not know the answer, but when you talked about the water line replacement containing asbestos, kind of a matrix of asbestos concrete, is that something that we need to be cognizantly aware or concerned about, especially from an EPA standpoint? And of course, how nasty asbestos can be.
Yeah. You hear the word asbestos, and I think it raises everyone's kind of like alert, right? It's not nothing. It is a big deal. Asbestos concrete pipe, though, will generally stay stable as long as you don't touch it. Where you start to have problems with AC pipe is it cracks. It tends to be very brittle as it gets older, and it will crack, and then you'll go in. Fixing it's more complicated because has to have to be handled differently, and it'll cause other cracks to happen farther down the line. And so you just have to be very careful with it. Digging near it is a little bit kind of, people are not scared of it, but just very much more aware of the AC pipe. And so I do know, it sounds like we've got a decent amount here in the city. And it's one of the things that if we can start to replace it, I think that'll be a positive for the community.
Okay, thank you. And then a second question, just for my orientation and awareness. When you talk about the high and low zone fence, are you referring to the two different tanks that we have, the tanks that we have over by the Justice Center, as well as that one standing, kind of looks like a insect antenna tank just south of 104th there in Cuevas?
I believe this is just for the tanks down the street from the Justice Center.
Okay, gotcha. I don't know what they call that antenna looking tank. Whatever. Okay, thank you.
I actually have a question about that as well. Are they changing the type of fencing, or is it just the same type of fencing, just repairing areas? They making it taller? Any improvements beyond because it continues to be damaged?
Yes, so I know that they are wanting to make it taller. I believe right now it's a 6-foot fence. They want to make it an 8-foot fence. There's actually some federal requirements around that requirements is it's probably more recommendations for security purposes, making those fences taller. In terms of the material, I can't speak to that quite yet, but I believe right now it's chain link, and that has proven to be pretty ripe for people cutting through it and gaining
Right.
access. So that'll be a topic of conversation.
Yeah, I would hope that if we are spending the money and improvements, that we make it a little bit harder for people to cut through, just because that's definitely a safety concern all around.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Kondo, did you have another question?
Yeah, this conversation actually just reminded me, I don't recall where I heard it, if it was at NLC or whatever, but I thought the bilateral infrastructure law had some components about hardening critical infrastructure and grants available for that. So I don't, again, it was a couple months ago, so it's very hazy in my mind, but I don't know if that's something we're considering.
Yeah. Let the finance guy tell.
Sorry. So in a late addition or change of pace, we're actually going to use ARPA funds to fund this project and hopefully get it done like in 2024 or very early in 2025. So it is scheduled and outlined here, but as we evaluated the ARPA funds that are available, we decided this was a priority project that we should get done sooner rather than later. So
Okay. Thank you.
apologies for the confusion of them being in the budget, but also probably going to come forward a little faster. Not apologizing for doing it faster, of course, but there are some dollars that we're going to be using for that.
Gotcha, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. That's actually great news. That's good to hear. I don't see any other questions for this fund, so.
One
Oh,
quick
wait.
thing,
Yes.
if council would like, Councilmember Kondo, you were asking about the antenna-like storage tank. There's a difference between high zone tanks and low zone tanks. Sarah, do you want to explain that? So the ones up on the hill are low zone tanks, but the one he's referring to is over in Westminster, if I have that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought one of those was ours, isn't it? No?
Yes, the one in one of those in Westminster is ours. And then we have tanks up here, as well as Thornton has a couple tanks.
So what I can add to that, I think that's probably a great answer. What I can add to that, and I'm not familiar enough yet with Northland's system, but you'll have different pressure zones. So you have a tank full of water that's pushes pressure down onto the distribution system so that when you turn your faucet on, you actually have pressure coming out. So ideally, you've got that bucket of water up high. But what you don't want to have happen is over pressurizing lines or have portions of your system that are under pressurized. So if it's too close to the elevation, you don't have much elevation there and you get really low pressure. If you're too far apart, then you'll get really high pressure and you can do damage to infrastructure and even do damage inside people's homes. So you have these different zones where you have different tanks to kind of make sure that everyone's got about the right amount of water pressure, no matter where you're at.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We're replacing both fences. My apologies.
Oh, we are?
Jason, yeah.
Okay,
I thought it was just the one at the Justice Center, but.
I had it wrong too.
That's great. And ARPA funding is covering both of those? Yes. Yep. Yeah, thank you for that information. I remember getting that a long time ago on a tour back in 2021, and I forgot about that, the difference between those tanks. So that's really interesting. Thank you for the education. Any other questions on this? No? I think we can move on. Thank you.
All right. On to the Wastewater Fund, page 55 of in the August 5th packet, if you're following along there. Our first line item here, where we are requesting dollars in 2025, is a collection system rehabilitation. This is $200,000 a year. Similar to the you have the collection system for the wastewater, distribution for our treated water. We have money going for both systems. This is for our collection system. Similar to the distribution system, we do have an accumulated amount of money in this account. And we are looking at using those funds for a lift station F, which is actually right here on Community Center and 120th. It needs some patching up and the concrete's failing in places, and so we need to do a little bit of work on that. So we're gonna spend those dollars here over the next probably year and a half to fix some of that. That money should also be going towards fixing and maintaining anything in the pipe collection system as well. Then we have the water treatment plants rehab. This is a standing $250,000 year over year, similar to the water treatment plant. They'll use that for roofs and concrete and that kind of just general maintenance. And actually, this year, they were doing upgrades to the aeration basins. So wastewater treatment plant operators farm little bugs in those tanks, and they have to feed air to those bugs. The aerators that was feeding air into those tanks, some of them had blanks for a variety of fairly complicated reasons. And so they took those little blanks off the top of the tubes and put actual diffusers there so that they would be able to get more air into those tanks. So that was a pretty positive thing, but that's where a good chunk of the money went this year. Then we have Lift Station B. Lift Station B is one of our larger lift stations, and it is showing its age, shall we say, and it's time for us to do some upgrades to it. So we have $1 million in 2025 to get engineering and get started potentially on some construction, and then 2026 is the bulk of the construction.
Where's lift station B located?
I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I texted Jason Hensel.
It's southeast of the Ramos Law Building. So if you're looking at the Ramos Law Building north, so you're looking at Ramos Law, it's right down here adjacent to the highway.
Okay.
But Sarah will have all of the locations memorized soon.
This time next year, I'll know it all.
And that wasn't
Or enough to be
designed-
dangerous.
That wasn't designed to trick you. You know.
All right. Next on the list, we have, and it's not for 2025, this is showing for 2026. I believe staff has been sharing that there's some pretty extensive work that needs to happen at the wastewater plant. So we have this $30 million sitting there for that. We are currently in the process of evaluating a couple of different options of ways that we might do this more efficiently, but we do have this kind of outstanding, rather large sum of money. So not till 26 currently as it's shown, but I did want to point that out. And I'm happy to take questions on the wastewater fund.
Councilmember Nowicki.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. So, going to CML, I heard a few things, ran into a few folks talking about wastewater and, the biggest complaint we obviously get from residents in that area is the smell, kind of mitigating the smell. Is there anything in here, or from what you've seen, is there kind of a plan to continue? And again, I know staff has continued, that's an issue that they continue to address. But you seem to have a great deal of knowledge just about this. Can you maybe expound upon that a little bit?
Absolutely. So 2024, you can see one of the first things listed here is odor mitigation, 686,000. That mostly was related to the headworks, which is the very front of the plant where a lot of smell can be generated. So that's what that dollar figure was for. So that should help. And one of the big problems with odor creation out there is the ponds that are currently being used to waste the final biosolids into. And so that's being discussed as a part of this $30 million of what does that look like? Because moving those ponds or trying to do something different there is going to be a costly endeavor. So that's part of the evaluation. Sometimes these things kind of interrelate to each other. You do one upgrade and it can cause other things down the stream. And so really trying to take a holistic view of the whole process.
Question related to that, didn't we do some type of like iron-based odor mitigator? Has that helped mitigation, the ferrous something that I'll watch the name?
Ferric sulfide?
Yes.
Sulfate,
Thank you.
sulfide? Yeah, so that's part of the 686,000 that they're finishing in September. So whether it helps or not
Okay,
we shall find out soon.
hopefully it will. Thank you. We have more questions. Councilmember Goff.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So just to follow up on that, I mean, we have to remind people that this is like somebody builds an airport and then a developer comes in and builds a bunch of houses next to the airport, and then the people who move in there complain about the airport. Because this was here long before Thornton put any houses up over there, so, we can only do so much. And then, so my question I was raising my hand for was, I know you're talking about this $30 million to do all the important things that we need to make this work. Then when I go up the column, it looks like that's going to be funded through revenue bonds. So we're putting some bonds out that year. Is that what the deal is? Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you. Did you have another question?
I did, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, but Dr. Goff pretty much hit it on the head. I was scratching my head when Councilmember Nowicki said you heard some complaints from residents. I'm thinking it's maybe Thornton residents and not Northland residents. I don't know. Did you hear from Thornton residents?
Adam?
Councilmember Nowicki?
I have,
Okay.
and I repeated the same thing that, hey, it's kind of there before.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. One future forward question, I guess, is I know the lift station A, I think that replacement took a while. So what does lift station B potentially look like in terms of like a time frame of getting that done? I mean, I know we're looking at 2026 to even start looking at that.
So we will know more. We'll start the engineering design next year. That engineering design, depending on the level of work, could take anywhere from 3 months to a year to complete. I'll have to know more and learn more, like where that falls, but usually it's gonna be a little while just for engineering. The project itself, when we bid it out, the timeline would be part of what the contractor will bid on. One of the complicating things that makes wastewater more challenging for lift stations and manholes related is that you can't turn the stream off, right? You're gonna have a constant flow, and so you're gonna have to do some sort of pump around, connecting things together, trying to get that flow around your work area. And that can get pretty costly. And so oftentimes that schedule becomes very important to the contractor and ultimately for us and how much it'll cost to actually do the work. So it's a big deal to take a lift station down, and I would imagine the construction would be a few months, maybe.
Oh, that's not terrible. It'll be a little messy. And then the last question is the, I don't think you touched on it, was the 1 million for the chemical building? If you can speak a little bit to that.
So we've been looking at that one in particular. Okay, just checking to make sure if he's going to jump up for me. So we've been looking at that one. We've had some other needs come up, and so the funding sources for that have become a little bit tighter, and so we're going to phase that in and probably use our the rehab budget to kind of help us walk through some of the stuff that needs to happen at the chem building.
Okay, so is that 1 million the final number, or is that part of a phase?
The 1 million was an initial estimate. And so we're kind of getting in there. There's different things that need to happen. There's some stairs that need to get repaired. There's some lining of tanks that needs to happen. And so it's kind of a whole bunch of small things that needs to happen in that $1 million. And so we're going to evaluate that and see what we can do to move forward.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions on this fund from anyone? No? We can move on.
All right. So then Stormwater Fund, and I believe there were some council questions on this one with the fund balance at the bottom does go negative. There's also some differences that you'll see in the August 5th budget versus what you're seeing in the presentation tonight. And that's all coming from really, this fund is fairly limited in its financial resources and trying to utilize the dollars that we have to make the biggest impact. And so we've kind of combined as much of money that we had available in order to implement a study where we are currently evaluating the entire stormwater system to really see what are our biggest pain points so that moving forward in the out years, we're making sure to be providing the best CIP options. And certainly there are components of this CIP list that push our fund balance in stormwater negative. And so I think that's probably a conversation we'll want to continue to have with City Council, especially after we get the results of the analysis and we can really determine what specifically needs to happen. Not going to necessarily go through the details of this here, knowing that there's potential that might change, but I'm happy to take questions as council has them.
Thank you. Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. And I was the person that asked the question. So I wonder if there's an opportunity here for our deputy director to just kind of share a quick summary of the discussion that we were having about, the functionality of why you have a negative fund balance and what that helps us do from a planning perspective.
Sure, thank you. One of the reasons, in particular this smaller fund that's a little bit more manageable to kind of look at, is we are really identifying the fact that there are some projects on the horizon that we're aware of and the fact that there isn't a funding source. So rather than pull the project out to say that it's not affordable, we're really being transparent to say there's some large projects, coming down the pipeline that we need to identify other sources of revenue. So those will be part of, as Sarah was mentioning, kind of decision points and conversations that we'll need to make on how to find that revenue stream to support the fund. And as she mentioned, as that analysis is completed, there's going to be additional features, I would imagine, that talk about ongoing maintenance and support of the system. So we'll tie all of that together and likely bring a recommendation for consideration for council. So
you're saying that having that line is kind of a nice leading indicator, if you will, the yellow flashing light, so that helps staff kind of figure out, okay, what are we gonna do to be able to continue to do the things we have to do, but yet anticipate where you're gonna get funds to be able to underwrite it, right?
Correct, yep.
Got it.
And if I could add, one project that you don't see in the CIP is the 112th roadway and ditch mitigation project. So as you know, we have requests in through the Senate and the House. Right now, the House has slated $1 million of a $15 million project. So that to say we have our work cut out for us in terms of securing funding for that project, but that's not factored in to this, but will be what you see in the strategic plan.
Okay, thank you.
Something to look forward to. Councilmember Nowicki.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. When did you say that analysis would be complete? We'll add more information.
Yeah, I believe that that's gonna be completed towards the end of the year.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
One additional clarification, if you don't mind,
ahead.
real quick. On the item that you just mentioned on the water treatment facility, the $1 million for the chemical building. So Sarah was correct in kind of multiple pieces and sources. A couple of weeks ago, we had that identified as a project for 2025. Again, we have some additional ARPA dollars available that we're going to apply towards this project. I don't believe it's going to be the full $1 million. I think they're at about 90% design, and so we don't have like a total like engineer estimate of what the cost might be. But additional dollars are going to be identified through ARPA funds to be applied to this project to hopefully get at least halfway to the million. Let's pretend it's $1 million. At least halfway, if not more, in support of making these upgrades to the plan. So,
That's good.
as I've mentioned before, it's a moving, living document, and it's moving and living since 2 weeks ago. So, we'll put this together with a little bit more clarity when we come see you all next time. But I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. I think you did a wonderful job. Welcome.
Thank
You
you,
did great.
thank
Yeah,
you.
let's give her a hand. You didn't seem nervous at all.
Oh, good, good. I have to say, learning the CIP up front is a really great way to get to know the system and the people, and so this is actually a really good way to get started with the city, so I appreciate the timing.
We are so happy to have you.
Thank
Thank you.
And Sarah's being humble. She asked to present, which is awesome initiative on her part. So shout out to her for jumping right in. We thought we threw you in, but you really jumped in, so appreciate it.
Can I say into the fire? I forgot what the
We
saying is.
say
I'm just gonna
deep
botch
end.
it.
We say
From the
deep
fire
end.
pan into the fire, right. Did great. Deputy City Manager, do you have something else for us? You look like you were gonna say something. No?
I was simply advancing the slide and
Okay.
just gonna to say that if there was any other questions about anything that wasn't covered, happy to attempt to address those. Otherwise,
Looks great.
that is all we've got.
Yeah, that was the fun stuff. Thank you so much to everyone that presented tonight. Are there any other items for council tonight? No? Okay, hearing none, we are adjourned.